Φίλες και φίλοι, καλησπέρα. Ευχαριστούμε τη Διεθνή Έκθεση Βιβλίου της Θεσσαλονίκης για την φιλοξενία. Θα παρουσιάσουμε απόψε ένα πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον βιβλίο. Η συνέντευξη θα γίνει στα αγγλικά με ταυτόχρονη διερμηνία και θα ήθελα να μην φύγετε. Αν έχετε καταφέρει να φτάσετε ως εδώ, πιθανότατα θα είσαστε σε κάποιο καναπέ, σε έναν γραφείο, με τις πιτζάμες, τις παντόφλες σας. Αυτή είναι η κατάσταση σήμερα. Θα σας παρότρινα να μην φύγετε, διότι αυτό είναι ένα βιβλίο που μπορεί να μας βοηθήσει να εμβαθύνουμε την κατανόησή μας για τα τεχνολογικά, αλλά και όχι μόνο πράγματα. Να μας βοηθήσει να εμβαθύνουμε το παρόν. Και σας λέω να μην φύγετε, γιατί ο τίτλος του βιβλίου, που είναι «Νέα σκοτεινή εποχή», του James Bridle, η τεχνολογία και το τέλος του μέλλοντος, σε δική μου μετάφραση, είμαι ο Μανώλης Ανδριωτάκης, από κυκλοφορία από τις εκδόσεις Μετέχμιο, βγήκε πολύ πρόσφατα. Πιθανότατα θα σας μοιάζει λίγο ψυχοπλακωτικός ο τίτλος. Νέα σκοτεινή εποχή. Θα σκέφτεστε, ευχαριστώ, έτσι, σοβαρά, μέσα σε αυτή την κατάσταση να διαβάσουμε άλλο ένα βιβλίο για την νέα σκοτεινή εποχή. Τι ζούμε, τι άλλο μπορεί να μάθουμε. Ωστόσο, είναι πολλά αυτά που μπορούμε να μάθουμε. Το βιβλίο δεν αναφέρεται μόνο στην τεχνολογία. Έχουμε τον James Bridle στο Zoom και μπορούμε να τον δούμε. Hello, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Πολύ καλά, ευχαριστώ.
Great. Θα μιλήσουμε στα αγγλικά και εσείς θα ακούτε την διερμηνία. So, hi, James. Where are you now?
I'm actually in the Netherlands now, but usually I would be on Eginet.
Yes, I think that you love Greece. It's
very much, yes.
I know. So I wanted to ask you, what was on your mind when you were writing this book? Because it seems now like a prophecy. It seems that you speak about a new dark age. It seems that we live in a dark age today. But you focus on technology, not on epidemiology, and it seems that the problem with systems, with systemic thought, and with the limits of systems are today, is today a very challenging issue. And you manage really to be very successful in your writing. So, what was on your mind when you were writing this book?
I mean, I started writing the book at a particular point. I'd been thinking about these things for, more than 10 years. But two things happened in particular that, sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I've been thinking about these things for kind of 10 years or so, but the book, I thought I'd write a really hopeful book about technology, basically, because I come from a time and a generation and a period of the internet that was very hopeful, I thought. And when, I personally was very excited about technology. And so I always thought I'd write a book about technology that was super hopeful and how amazing it was. And when it came time to write that book, two things happened. The first of which was Brexit, and the second of which was the election of Donald Trump. So I mean, that's pretty much exactly what just over 4 years ago now is when I really started writing the book. And it just seemed impossible in that moment to write a book about how great the internet was and what a wonderful thing it was for the world, when quite clearly it was proving to be the opposite. And really what happened is the book became an attempt to understand partly what had happened, to reassess my own assumptions, and to take seriously, I think, this understanding that it wasn't turning out how it was supposed to. And this story that we've been telling ourselves about technology, particularly about network technology and the internet for so long, just wasn't the case. And before we can go any further, we have to, I felt it was necessary to state that and be very clear about it and explore it a bit.
Mm-hmm. But still, James, technology and the internet especially is a wonderful thing. We are users and we love those systems. So your book is not about a dystopian, let's say, presence. We are all users, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you start talking about it as a dystopia or about evil technology or about any of these things, I think for me, you're setting up a kind of false distinction between technology and the world. Technology isn't something that exists on its own, away from us. It's not something that exists. The internet is not something that's separate from the real world. So a lot of the book also is about making it clear in which ways the internet is absolutely embedded and part of everyday life, and a kind of normal and boring part of everyday life in many, many ways. And then trying to unpick the moments when it seems to make the situation worse, for want of a better term. But no, like the phrase that recurs in the book, and that's not my phrase, it's been around for a long time, but it's simply that technology is neither good, nor is it bad, nor is it neutral. It's never neutral, in fact. It always has some effect. And sometimes that's caused by the users, sometimes it's caused by the design, by the people who make it, and sometimes it's totally unintended consequences that are really very, very hard to predict. Although the fact that there are going to be unintended consequences shouldn't be hard to predict. That is the thing that we should expect. And that's the thing that kind of gets me really interested over again. Like it's not whether the thing is good or bad, but like what is it actually doing? And how is it doing it? And what is the kind of weird mess of users and designers and software and infrastructure that's making that happen?
But in terms of politics, you refer to the elections of 2016 and to Brexit. Today it seems that something is changing, isn't it?
I mean, you said at the beginning, not me, that there's prophetic parts of the book, and I don't think anything's changing, for sure, really sadly, and certainly though. I don't think there's any epidemiology in the book or kind of pandemic stuff. Everything we've seen around it is kind of in there, I think. And particularly in terms of the kind of cultural divides that emerge around any kind of public discourse or news or conflict, whether that's the kind of ongoing political divisions between right and left in the US and in Europe and in elsewhere, or whether it's the kind of culture wars that are possible to be stirred up by science itself, by something as simple as wearing a mask. The COVID has proved to be a breeding ground, if you'll forgive the phrase, for the most extraordinary new array of kind of conspiracy theories, and has lent itself to exactly the kind of mechanisms that I talk about in the book, for the way in which having vast amounts of information at our disposal doesn't necessarily allow any of us to think more clearly or reasonably about a situation, and in fact seems to drive us slightly crazy. So we've seen all year the kind of conspiracy theories about the origin of the disease. We've seen it associated with everything from kind of Russian or Chinese spies to 5G, kind of these technological conspiracy theories, and we're going to keep seeing that happening throughout the period of the vaccine and kind of forever. So, and of course, Brexit is still happening. So maybe I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say something has changed. Maybe Trump is out. Maybe he's out. But
yes,
aside from that,
obviously.
no, I see exactly the same mechanisms still at work.
Yes, it's true, but it seems that you are very interested in politics. That reading your book, someone understands that it's a political book. Politics is everywhere, and I want you to tell to Greek readers how technology is connected to politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I get this always in my writing and I get it in my artworks as well. So I work as a visual artist and I make artworks, installations, online works, things that go in galleries. I know I'm always referred to as a political artist as well, and now you're calling me a political writer. And it's nice, but for me, it's always a bit weird. Maybe because my idea of what constitutes politics is so broad, in part, but also because I think people think there's some kind of separation between technology and politics. So the first thing to say about that is essentially, politics, in the way that I talk about it, in the way that I think it means something, is quite simply, the process by which we make decisions amongst ourselves, and the science or philosophy or discourse that governs how we interact in the broadest possible ways. So, of course, technology is involved with politics because technology has inserted itself so deep into the ways that we think and communicate that it is sort of come right into the base level of our politics. We do our politics through these technologies, and we think through these technologies as well, as I talk about extensively in the book. But also broadly, any discussion of technology as a thing that is made by people for other people, and therefore affects people's lives, is itself political. A friend of mine always says that any technological problem at sufficient scale is a political problem first. If you're making decisions that are going to affect people's lives directly or indirectly by the technology that you've built, then you're making political decisions, because those will affect the way in which those people's lives are lived. They're going to affect the kinds of choices they can make about their own lives and the way they think about those problems. So you're inserting yourself into those people's political lives. That's just the very base level. Of course, then when you go up from that level of just everything being political on that level, you see the fact that technology is acting politically in the way that it is constituted, in the fact that it's largely run by very big corporations. The internet, like the literal infrastructure on which the internet runs, is owned by basically five companies, five large corporations, four of them American and one of them Chinese, own 95% of the internet. So we're already in a place where five corporations run most of the world, most of the world's communications, which is an incredible amount of power that we don't really think and talk about. And of course, by owning them, they concentrate further power to them. And then we can get into the fact that the way in which technology is built concentrates knowledge of power into a few hands, quite often within those companies, but also within certain strata and classes of society, and so on and so forth. So technology is political at its base. It acts politically, and it reinforces a certain politics, which is fairly obvious to all of us, but to be clear, is the most free market, aggressive, extractive form of capitalism. So yeah, that's how it's political.
But let me play the role of devil's advocate. Someone would say that, James, things are not so bad, things are okay, we all get advantage of those great tools. They are just tools, they can be used either for good or for the bad. Okay, it's the market regulates itself. We get value from those tools, so why worry? Maybe you are playing with our fears of the systems which fail, and okay, this is a very basic, of course, and essential fear today, because we are all afraid of our medical systems to fail. So do we have to fear systems, technological systems to fail?
I'm less concerned about the failure of those kind of specific systems. I'm concerned about the failure of the political systems that they rely upon in turn. you know, it's all very well to say the medical systems aren't going to fail if you have access to those medical systems. If you only have access to those medical systems because you're particularly wealthy yourself or can afford certain kinds of insurance or so on and so forth, then that's a political problem. And the current way in which we build technologies is making that problem worse. It's increasing financial inequality, it's increasing educational inequalities, and it's increasing kind of national inequalities between different parts of the world, where some parts of the world are becoming richer and more powerful at the expense of other parts of the world. And my belief and my politics is that the further that you increase those inequalities, the worse they are for most of us. That the benefits of those inequalities only accrue to a very, very, very small number of people. And I see it as absolutely crucial, particularly with what we know is coming down the line in the next decade. Because, I mean, if you think it's bad now, then I've got quite a lot to tell you about climate change and future pandemics and everything that we know is going to happen. We're going to need much, much more resilient societies, not more resilient technologies, but more resilient societies to be able to deal with and address and mitigate these issues. Not stop them, because there's no stopping them, but being able to deal with them. And I happen to believe, in fact, that technology is a really, really good way of addressing them, but not through technology itself. This is the point that I tried to make in the book. For me, we are capable of learning and thinking and doing much, much more, right? Amongst individually and amongst ourselves. But that is a quality of education. It's partly access to tools, and the tools are important, and some of them are great. But they're only really, really important if we all know how they work and how to build them for ourselves, how to address them, how to change, how to make them work for us, and not just for the people who own them and earn money from them. That is the power of these technologies to me. And I really believe that kind of democratizing access to these tools, decentralizing them, distributing them technologically and the power that resides in them is one of our best hopes for addressing the very real problems that are coming down the line. But that's not the way we're building and designing them at the moment. And as a result of the way that we're building and designing them at the moment, you see the kind of second order effects in the present of this kind of increased division and confusion and anger and uncertainty in the world. So, you know, you say, like, I paint this really scary picture. To me, the picture I'm painting is just what the world looks like right now, increasingly kind of divided, increasingly characterized by these kind of fundamentalisms, by this political polarization. But I also really see that just as a kind of early warning sign of the ways in which our use, the way we think about technology, is failing us. Not the technology itself, just the way we're implementing, and particularly the society that is implementing it and the way we shape that. But I maintain we can do a lot better, and there are concrete steps we can take to change that. But they are also long-term ones. They're generational and they are political at scale.
In a way, James, your book is educational. What you did here is very useful to people who don't think, and you are obsessed with thinking. You urge us to think a lot, and it is educational. But I wonder, what are those concrete steps that you refer to we are going to take? But as you were speaking, I was thinking of your research. I was very impressed translating your book. Of your,
thank you again for
yes, that. It's true. It's amazing. I say that maybe it's because you are an artist and your references are so rich and so various. It's impressive, and that's why I think that it's a very good reason for the Greek audience to read your book. So what are those concrete steps that long term we have to take?
The long term, they are educational, and they're characterized by two really important things. The first is to break down the thing that we've been complaining about for 100 years minimum, and probably a lot more, which is the kind of false dichotomy or distinction between the arts and the sciences. This is only being, reinforced in the present. We have within schools, within universities, within so on and so forth, there's a really intense distinction between the humanities and the sciences. Essentially between those disciplines which employ critical thinking and those which employ the scientific method. Both of these things are incredibly important, but both of them need to be taught together. And there is no value to a society that produces only engineers, just as there's a lot of difficulty for a society that only produces poets. This is really, centrally key for me, is that we have this danger of over-specialization and giving one particular side more, thought than other. The second part of that educational part is that the way in which we teach and understand and think about science and technology needs to radically change. It's related in the sense that it needs more critical thinking, but it also just needs a more focus on doing and understanding things rather than them being job training. So I know this from my own experience, doubly, in that I both tried to study the humanities and the sciences and always got into quite a lot of trouble for trying to do both. But also that I studied computer science, and I was essentially, being trained to go and work in a bank. That's what almost everybody who studied computer science with me did. They went and worked in the stock market, and they probably got well paid, and some of them probably made a huge amount of money. Or they went to work for a few technology companies. But essentially they were trained that this was a means to an end in order to get employment, which is another general problem with our educational system, rather than it being more like the humanities in that it's a part of critical thinking. If you ask a history teacher or an English teacher, why are you teaching this? There's an effort that's just, the biggest answer is it's good to know and it's good for your mind, it's important to know bits of your history, but also by learning about our history, we learn about so much more about human nature, about certain aspects of the way the world works, about being to navigate the world ourselves. This is true for the sciences as well, and it's particularly true for technology. People who understand how these little things work and what they're doing to you, right, are able to exercise more meaningful choice in their lives and are able to potentially use them in completely different ways and for different ends than if you have no idea how they work. And that's a hugely meaningful difference. And so those are the big changes within, I can go on. But then, for example, if you want an example of big, meaningful changes to make that can move us from the situation we're in, that's one of them. Obviously, the other one is the end of capitalism, but that's also a generational goal.
That's, yes, a great pass, because I've read the book, I don't know if you are aware of this, fully automated communism?
Luxury capitalism. Luxury communism, I'm sorry.
Yes. So, are you fond of this? Do you believe that we need something like that?
I think it's, so this thing, yeah. I love the idea, and I think it's an incredibly important idea. And I think the whole trend of what is called a kind of left accelerationism is very necessary and important. It's not my preferred route because it basically continues to outsource critical human thinking and the basis of human livelihood to machines. In that it still believes essentially that we can kind of automate our way to happiness. And wealth and human thriving. And I don't believe that's the case. And also, I think it glosses over the fact that in order to achieve that kind of liberty and success, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a fight. The means of information, just as the means of production have always been, are already owned by people who don't have our best interests at heart. And to think that we can somehow just immediately flip those over to a more progressive politics is naive. But as I say, I think it's really, really important that that a progressive political position, by which I mean one that is more interested in the health and the wealth of everybody, has a technological component to it, and a way of talking about technology, a technological literacy, as I speak about in the book. You know, I use this phrase quite a lot. It means what I was talking about just before about education. Technological literacy means being able to talk about technology because you understand it and you know how it actually works and you know what it can do, even if you don't use it yourself. But you have a full understanding of its role in society and how, you know, and what it can do. And if we had that on the left, we'd be a lot better off than we currently are.
I think that the things have been so complicated, so difficult to understand. Even as you say, sometimes you cannot understand, and you have to admit this. And that maybe I agree that education, okay, is a cliche, of course, but we have to.
It's a cliche because we've been saying it for 100 years.
Yes.
It doesn't make it any less true.
Yes, but you pointed out something very interesting. I was making an interview with a renowned, very well-known computer artist, scientist, and he was focusing. He was saying that humanities will play. For sure, they have a role to play in the future regarding AI, let's say. So, and you seem to say something like this, or not?
I do, and I agree. I mean, I don't know too much more about the context of your discussion, but yeah, it's absolutely vital to this. Because the kinds of AI that we're building at the moment are fundamentally anti-human. And I don't say that purely in a kind of scaremongering, the robots are coming to get us way, but the robots are coming to get us precisely because the robots are being built by the Chinese, the US military on the one hand, and Google and Facebook and a couple of other very powerful profit-making corporations on the other. And you know, very, very literally. So, and I'll tell you a story that isn't in the book to illustrate this, because I think it's an important one in the context of Greece. I was up in Epirus not too long ago, and as I'm sure you and most of the people watching this are aware, Epirus and a lot of Western Greece is currently being explored for the use, for the extraction of oil and gas, right? And if this oil and gas is found, and if this oil and gas is extracted, it will be a disaster, not just for Greece, but for the planet, right? We know that every single drop of oil that we extract from the ground is killing us and is going to be is a disaster for us as a society, as civilization, as a planet, on top of the absolute destruction it will, you know, bring to some incredibly, incredibly beautiful parts of the world. So how are these oil companies looking for this oil and gas? How are they going to find it? Well, they're using AI, right? They're using AI quite directly. This is one of the most profitable places in which AI is employed now. I'm waving my hands to indicate that the words AI are kind of completely meaningless at this point, right? There is no such thing as artificial intelligence, but there is very clever new forms of computing that do smart things, and that's what I'm talking about. And those are made by the same 5 companies that own the internet, right? Exactly the same 5 companies: Google, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, and Alibaba, Chinese company. And at least the US ones I know about, all 4 of them have deals with oil companies, right? In particular, IBM is the partner of Repsol, which is the company that is exploring in Icarus, right? And IBM has has a 10-year partnership with Repsol, one of the largest oil companies in the world, to build AI to find and extract oil. That's what AI is doing in the present. It is drilling, it is helping oil companies drill for oil, bringing that oil to the surface and helping them to burn it in more and more efficient ways, which will kill us. Having told you that, do you think that maybe some people other than scientists and engineers should be involved in the development of AI? Should maybe some humanities people be involved in the development of AI? I think so. I think that sounds a fairly logical and sensible thing to do. I could give you a lot of other examples of the way in which AI is being used, but the simple fact is it's just being built by engineers at corporations at the moment, and that is really, really bad for us. It could be all kinds of other things. That's my next book. But for the moment, it's a really terrible thing, and we need to change the way that it's made rapidly.
Yes, because it seems that in medicine we can find some very great examples of using this data processing, data mining, and data, let's say, AI, as you say. But okay, I don't want to focus on that because, as you said, it's the subject of your new book.
I'm still writing. We're not going to talk about that yet.
Okay. So, but you are very concerned in the politics of the environment. And in the book, although it's a book on technology, we can address your concern on climate change, on the environment. And my question, James, is that it seems very difficult to resist all this. Let's say, if your subtitle is "Technology and the End of the Future," sometimes pessimism is easier than activism, because it seems that the tools of resistance today are best used for the other way round. I don't know. Sometimes translating your book, I was really depressed, and I wanted to find, the light. Where is the light, James?
Look, I'm sorry. The clue is in the title. It is a dark book, and I found it depressing to write in places, quite extensively, and I say that in the book. This is hard work. I think it is necessary work for me. That's the key. We can't make any progress without being very clear about where we stand. At the same time, I don't find the book pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. I don't know why not. I possibly have some kind of chemical imbalance in the brain or something. I find so much of this to be fascinating and exciting and full of possibility. The light is the fact that there's so many other ways to do this that we're not doing, right? That what I see when I talk about this darkness, right? I'm talking about a failure of imagination. I'm talking about the fact that we've allowed so much that is fascinating and interesting, like change bringing and full of kind of novelty, to be subsumed into the most boring and thoughtless and frankly stupid people and corporations and governmental systems you could possibly imagine. Right? Because we haven't imagined, because we have failed to think, right? And we've allowed this thinking to happen on our behalf, right? Mostly by technologies, but only because those technologies were captured by some of the annoying people a while back. But the light for me is that so much more is possible, and that there's just like endless interesting stuff to be explored and done and changed and built. That's you know, there's no fear in the dark for me. You know, and that's key as well. And I think I do say that in the book. Like, you don't have to be afraid in the dark. The dark is an exciting place to be. Like, lots of stuff happens in the dark, you know? We have this false equivalence between kind of light and goodness that has implications in multiple ways, right? From kind of religious Western monotheistic you know, theologies on which technological culture is built, you know, which precedes anything I even write about in the book, all the way through, you know, general kind of westernized racial, colonial, imperial histories, all of this kind of stuff. All of that that's all embodied in the light. But in the dark, there's loads of stuff happening. And it's it's an exciting place to be too.
Yes, it's true. It's true. In that way, we can see your book as an inspiring, let's say, educational tool. I agree with you about our lack of imagination. Great things could happen if we would see colors and not just black and white, the darkness and the light, as you say. I think that your book, yes, I think that your book needs to be read from young people, because young people are, you know, very open-minded. It seems that they can be open-minded and they can change things, because I insist on that. I insist on, you showed me your mobile phone. It's second nature, this, and I cannot see, let's say, acts of resistance in those tools. We have seen the advertised Arabic Spring protests, or the Me Too movement, or the Occupy in New York. But it seems that technology is not very helpful in terms of movements, political movements. I don't know if in the arts it has made some progress. You as an artist, what would you say?
Well, I'll talk about the political movement thing first. I think it's really important because I can't stand the kind of claiming of political movements, particularly ones that have taken place on the streets in the face of huge amounts of violence, like the Arab Spring, or you know, the Egyptian Revolution, or what's happening in Hong Kong, or lots of other places. When these are called like Twitter or Facebook revolutions, that's kind of insulting to the people who put their bodies on the ground. You know, these are not caused by these, and these are not the only ways that they can be done. On the other hand, I don't think, again, that there should be this distinction between, like, you know, using the tools of technology for political change and the necessity of kind of bodies in space on the street. A physical protest and it's all direct action in other forms. There's just, for me, again, there's just not a divide. It just, you know, those things played a part. Other tools would have played a part. Tools play a part, and you know, I'm not about to like reject them because, you know, I think because I think there's something, because they're not going to help. If they can help, they'll help. And no, I think it's a kind of false dichotomy. You mentioned Occupy, and Occupy for me is a really key example of technological literacy going to work. And I'll tell you this story about that. Because I happened to be in New York when Hurricane Sandy struck. This is what, 5-6 years ago now. So this is just after basically Occupy Wall Street had basically been shut down by the police. Hurricane Sandy hit New York. And immediately, the groups that had been part of Occupy switched into disaster relief. And within 48 hours of Hurricane Sandy wrecking, destroying huge parts of the Rockaways, of the Long Island coast, these coastal communities of New York, the first people on the ground were activists from Occupy New York. They got there 2 or 3 days ahead of the Red Cross and the federal emergencies, FEMA. The reason they were able to do that is that during Occupy New York, during the camp and tent process in Manhattan, they'd built incredibly powerful technological tools for organizing, for collecting and distributing food, for finding out what people needed, for communicating quickly across very simple networks. When I said they built them, I think they used they used spreadsheets most of the time, right? They probably used Google Sheets. They used kind of Microsoft spreadsheets. But it wasn't about the tools. They had the access to the tools, but it was about as many people as possible knowing how to use those tools. So they could very, very quickly reach a huge number of people through their communications networks online. They could gather that information and put it in databases and spreadsheets. They could organize people to do it. And they were the first emergency responders, right? So they'd built a technological literacy amongst their political activists using these tools. They then put it into place, and they had a political end, because the people who live along the Rockaways and Coney Island and those bits of Long Island, they're not Occupy types, right? They're very different political demographic. It's very Republican out there. And so to have the first people on the ground helping them to be the same, to use a 60s expression, like long hairs and hippies and punks and anarchists, who previously they thought were bad for protesting the banks in Manhattan, that's a powerful political result. And it came about because of the use of technological tools. But specifically, technological literacy in being able to use them together for that political aim. So there's not a distinction between the use of the tools and the political aim. It's how good you are at using them and whether you can use them to do what you want to do.
Great. The following question is in that spirit, the literacy, the technological literacy issue, because one of my favorite chapters in your book is where you speak about the YouTube videos for kids. And as I know you are a new parent, I am a parent too. So what do you think about those newcomers and what will their life be like? Because things like Internet of Things come, and they may grow up in worlds where they find by default some technologies. They will have a refrigerator always connected or everything. So it's urgent, yes, to have this technological literacy, as you say, but how do you personally feel about young and very, very young people?
I have no idea, and I'm not going to tell them, essentially. I mean, the section you refer to, the YouTube piece, started as an essay outside the book and then became part of the book when I realized it was the same question that I was trying to answer. And in that essay, I talk about very specifically the fact that at that point I wasn't a parent, but I knew small kids. Lots of my friends had small kids, and I thought about their use of the internet quite a lot. And the things that I was finding on the internet made me think that no child should ever go anywhere near it. At the same time, as I write in the essay, I had the internet access unmonitored from the age of 12. And the internet wasn't some magical better place back then. In fact, in some ways, it was probably worse. It was less moderated and less protected than it is now. And I had plenty of interesting experiences on it. And the point is that I wouldn't change those experiences because they're what made me who I am. And so there's no way I can prescribe the use that younger people, including my own children, might have to that. As always, we're talking about a book fair, right? I mean, and what we're talking about, on the other hand, is censorship, right? We're talking about whether people should have access to information and tools and so on and so forth. And I would hope that the answer that everyone interviewed at a book fair would give is that we do not do that, right? What we do is we try to provide the tools for critical thinking, right? And in this case, the tool for critical thinking is technological literacy. So my poor child, before he is allowed anywhere near the internet, is basically going to have to build his own computer, right? I ordered him his first Raspberry Pi, right, which is a little kind of toy computer. He's already got it, right? He can't speak. He has very poor.
But he has a Raspberry Pi. Okay.
Happen. And I know it sounds silly, but that really is my answer. I was just reading today a really wonderful book that came out I think it came out in the 80s. And it's called The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder. And it's a history of the development of a particular microcomputer in the 1970s. So this is a computer that sits somewhere between mainframes and like today's personal computer. And it's basically fascinating because it's a kind of social history of the incredible nerds who built these machines. Like really programmers before programming was known outside people who touched computers. Incredibly focused, incredibly intelligent engineers who are brilliant, but betray everything about themselves that I've been saying about the dangers of only learning computers, except some of them are better. One of them, I just read this morning, one of them talks about the fact that his kids can't watch TV because he didn't like what they were watching on TV. So he deliberately disabled all the TVs and now was teaching his kids how to fix the TVs. If they wanted to watch the TV, they had to fix the TV first, right? And he was like, eventually they'll get to watch stuff I don't want to watch, but by then they'll also know how to fix a TV. And I feel basically that was in the 1970s. So like I'm taking a cue from there, and the same thing will apply to the computer. But you know, all I'm giving you is the local parent version of the education story I told earlier.
I totally agree with
the same deal, and I hope I won't betray my politics by giving a different answer to my own kids than I would do on that education question.
I totally agree, James, because as I say many times when speaking about those issues, that I would say that I would teach young people not to see those things as black boxes, because they are not black boxes. You can smash it. They're not. They have how do you say chips inside. They're not something natural. It's technical. It's technological. So we have power upon them. So we just need, as you say, thought and of course dialogues and books like this, educational, let's say, tools and the literacy. We have just 5 minutes. I want to ask you many things about your work, about your artistic work, because it's like introducing you to the Greek audience. I don't know if you have something currently working on and you would like to share with us.
Well, I'm currently working on a new book, which has been interesting to do this year. New book is some of the ecological and environmental questions from New Dark Age, and I'm essentially trying to bring these questions about technology and questions about ecology and environment into dialogue a little bit more, think them through a bit more, and also hopefully write something a bit more hopeful and a little more optimistic. Not because I've changed particularly, but just because I think it's nice to balance book a little bit. And so it's a book that contains many, many stories about nature and the environment. And most of them are set in Greece. All year, through 2 lockdowns now and through this kind of very strange and it's been wonderful to have access to Greece while writing the book. It's had a big impact on its writing. I'm not sure I would have written anything like the same if I was somewhere else. But it's also strengthened my belief that Greece is an interesting place to think about these questions. There's a lot of obviously very, very serious and real problems, that Greece faces that are shared with much of Europe and much of the rest of the world, but have their own particular flavor in Greece, the present political problems, social problems, financial problems. There's something, but Greece is at the forefront of those questions, is what I'm trying to say. I have a very strong belief that Greece, is in such an exceptionally interesting place for being at the place that confronts these things first. Greece was the first really place in Europe to confront the kind of financial chaos and turmoil of the last 15 years that it's still confronting, but that everywhere else has to front up to too. It was the first place, and it's still bearing the main brunt within Europe of migration, something that is only going to increase in the future, that is coming for everywhere. So the issues that are faced in Greece, I think are important for everywhere, and some of the answers that are formulated and prototyped in Greece can be at the leading and the forefront of what everyone is doing in the next 50 to 100 years, whether that's questions over kind of fossil fuel extraction, whether it's questions over the appropriate use of technology, whether it's bigger social questions around kind of financialization and migration. We only had a few minutes, so I'm not going to go any further into that. But there's a false idea, I think, that these questions of technology and therefore the questions of politics that emerge from them are questions that are only significant to kind of Silicon Valley and maybe a couple of places in Europe. And I think the opposite. I think those places are boring and dead and going away and of less and less significance. And the places that are of future significance and how we want to change these things are places that were perceived to be at the kind of edges of these technologies, of which the whole of the Mediterranean is a really important example.
Great, James. It seems we are very lucky to have you in Greece, and I hope we will see you soon.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, and because we need thought. As you said, we need this philosophy and ethics, and maybe we need much more in this. Very strange times. I didn't want to ask you about the pandemics, about the lockdowns, because there are too much in your book, and I wanted to focus on your book. I hope we will have another chance to tell much more about the current state and the future. I would like to thank you very, very much for the
Thank you
dialogue.
very much. It's always a pleasure, and I hope we get that chance to talk more as well.
Yes. So.
Next time in Greece.
Of course.
Σιγά.
Great. Με λίγο κρασί. Εγώ να σας καληνυχτήσω. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που μας παρακολουθήσατε. Ελπίζω να ήταν αυτή η συζήτηση διαφωτιστική. Ο James, όπως θα καταλάβατε, είναι ένας πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον συγγραφέας. Το πρώτο του βιβλίο αυτό έκανε πολύ μεγάλη αίσθηση στο εξωτερικό. Μεταφράστηκε σε πολλές γλώσσες. Το έχω μεταφράσει εγώ στις εκδόσεις Μετέχμιο. Κυκλοφόρησε πολύ πρόσφατα. Κρατάω την φράση του James ότι χρειαζόμαστε τεχνολογικό εγγραμματισμό. Χρειαζόμαστε επειγόντως να καταλάβουμε πώς δουλεύουν αυτά τα υπέροχα εργαλεία που έχουμε στα χέρια μας, τι σημαίνουν και πώς μπορούμε εμείς να τα θέσουμε προς το δικό μας όφελος. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Καλό βράδυ. Τα λέμε.